Hello, everyone. This is Trip, and I'm here with Thomas J. Oord, a heretic. And
It still doesn't sound right.
I, if we were making wagers of all of our friends, who would get called out first, I did not have you on the list, Tom. I just want you to know.
Well, I was thinking just today when I was a student at Nazarene Theological Seminary back in the mid, or I guess early 90s. Near the last week of seminary, someone put a butcher paper thing on the board, like in high school, like the prettiest smile and all this sort of stuff. And I won the award of most likely to change the denomination or get kicked out.
Oh,
So there you go.
and despite the fact you are vehemently against determinism, and that particular interpretation of prophecy,
You
sometimes things
Yeah,
just line up.
I guess
Things
so.
just line up.
I'd like to
Um,
think, though, that I did a little of both. I mean, fully kicked out, but also did some changing.
I I think so, but I'm a member of your fan club. Um, and so for those that may have just been sitting on YouTube and this popped up or on Facebook, um, Thomas J. Oord, philosophical theologian, Nazarene, ordained, lifelong, taught in Nazarene schools, continues to teach graduate students in theology, practical theology, all sorts of stuff. Written a whole bunch of books about love. Um, Written public books questioning all sorts of doctrines. There were actual councils about um, problematizing dominant understandings of God through church history in relationship to, say, science, change, divine power, evil, all lots of topics, that Aquinas and company had thoughts about. Tom's challenged us, but well, that's not what does it. Um, of all the things Tom has championed, practicing the radical inclusive love of Jesus got him in some trouble, in particular with the queer community in the Nazarene Church. And we decided to do this before the whole process played out. I knew I wanted to get to talk to you about it. And um, having had situations where they wrap up and you aren't allowed to talk, and knowing you were going to be, I wanted to make sure everyone got to hear the story in your own voice and such. So I want to let you take time to tell the story however you want, and then I'll ask questions. People have sent me in questions in advance, and some of the questions might be like, well, how did you understand this and think about this theologically? How do you see
Yeah.
yourself in the Nazarene? How does the process work? How could this have gone better or worse? Like if you're dealing with these issues, people have all sorts of questions. Those of you that on the live stream, if you have ones that you're like, Trip, remember this question after he shares a story, you can try to weave it in, then type the word question in front of it, and then put the question. That way, I know you want me to mark it and try to weave it in later. Because otherwise, feel free to chat it up in the chat. I see a lot of people in there already. We got people from Indiana, California, Canada, Baltimore, Texas, Scotland. There's a wide variety of people that have already hopped on here, entering in the chat. Y'all feel free to, talk away. But so Tom, um, you go ahead and take your time to tell the story,
Okay.
and then we will kind of unpack it, think
Yeah.
theologically and that kind of thing.
Well, before I get going, I just want to thank you, Trip. Thanks not only for making this evening possible, but being a friend and supporter throughout the whole process. We've had conversations here and there, and you've asked about how things are going, and I appreciate that. And you're not the only one. There's been other folks who've been encouraging, supportive, and so I want to begin by expressing my gratitude to you and others.
Well,
Yeah.
I like getting to be your friend. I just want you to know this is one of the reasons it was surprising. I have some brilliant theologian friends who their interpersonal skills, ability at being friendly and communicating and just like uplifting, even across deep difference, are not quite as impeccable as yours. So
Ooh. Thanks, Trip.
personality, sometimes it's just different people have different vibes, but like you grease the relational wheel with love every morning. And
Thanks, thanks.
that's why I'm sure I'm not the only one that was surprised that
Mm,
you become the object of the spectacle. But
mm. Well, maybe I think the best way to start this tell the story is to start from the time that I realized I should be an affirming person. And this was back in 1993 and 94. I was a student at Nazarene Theological Seminary. I took a class from a great professor named Ed Robinson, who has since passed away. And it was a Christian education or religious education class. And here I am, as you mentioned earlier, more of a philosophical theologian. And I thought, oh, this is not going to be any fun. Religious education, curricula, yeah, yeah. So we were in the course, and I liked the professor a lot. And a couple of friends of mine, Dana Hicks, who you might know, and a guy named Reg Watson, who's also since passed, we decided we wanted to really get to the bottom of this. In those days, we called it the homosexuality question. And so we decided we were going to write curricula for the Church of the Nazarene on the question of homosexuality. We used the Wesleyan quadrilateral as our framework, which those of you who don't know what that is taking looking at what Scripture says, the Christian tradition says, experience, and reason. So that was our kind of framework for our curricula. And that meant, at least for me, it was the first time I had really taken seriously the 6 to 8 passages in Scripture that most people think pertain to, again, what we said in those days, homosexuality. And so as I took that seriously and started reading the scholarship at the time, at which there's been a lot more scholarship since then, but even at the time, there was really good scholarship saying that things weren't nearly as clear as one might think. The passage in Leviticus that talks about a man not lying with a man. Why do we uh, think that's important, but not the passage that says, you shouldn't wear clothing with two different kinds of fabrics? What's the hermeneutic or the interpretive principle we use to privilege one of those and thinks that it still applies today and not the other? Or the passage in Sodom and Gomorrah that didn't seem, I was told that had to do with homosexuality, but turns out it seems like it has a lot to do with the lack of hospitality and the shaming kind of process sometimes done to strangers in the ancient Middle East or Near East. Or in the New Testament, the passage in Romans, probably the most cited one, that talks about women giving up their natural desires and being laying with other women, and men giving up their natural desires. I read stuff about how that might refer to older men and younger boys in the Roman Empire, or why call that unnatural and not something else. Or when Paul says that men should not have long hair because that's unnatural. We don't have a problem. Most people don't have a problem with men with long hair. So as I kind of went passage by passage, looking at the interpretive issues, I came to realize that the scriptures just didn't have a strong argument against what we today would say queer or LGBTQ plus or same-sex intimacy. So, then we worked out the other issues and we kind of ended up writing our curricula that said, look, if you're going to be affirming, then here's the kind of approach you take. If you're not going to be affirming, you at least have to, think about this in this kind of way. But the bigger question for me at that time was, okay, now that I've kind of reasoned my way to an affirming position, should I stay in the Church of the Nazarene? Because those of you who don't know, the Church of the Nazarene is kind of like conservative Methodism. The church left Methodism in 1908. At least most of the early leaders were Methodists. And we left because the Methodists were too liberal. They were dancing, they were smoking, they were going to movies and baseball games. And that was like way over the edge. So I thought to myself, look, it doesn't seem like the Church of the Nazarene is anywhere close to moving to an affirming position. We don't even talk about this in public ways. Should I leave the denomination? And I ended up staying for three reasons. One, I discovered that there were other Nazarenes who were affirming, and many of them were in the academy. And so I felt like I wasn't the only one. Second, I thought maybe I could move this denomination in a more affirming direction because it had its fundamental theological framework of love. And I thought, well, that's a natural um, theological position to make an argument for full queer inclusion. And third, I was aiming and hoping and wanting to be a professor at a Nazarene university, and I ended up teaching at two of them. And I knew that there were going to be kids coming to my classrooms who were queer and asking these questions, and I wanted to be sort of available to them and an insider to help in that way. So I began a career as a Nazarene philosopher and theologian. And those early years, Trip, there were a lot of times when I felt guilty. You know, I was helping kids, students. I was working with sort of the more intelligent students, the kind of in small groups on these issues, but I always felt or wished I could do more. I had to be very, very careful about things. Everything had to be, I had to really trust someone to sort of let them know my view on things. And when you're not out at the front of the parade, the queer parade, and you're sort of not involved at all, and yet you're affirming, it's just, you feel guilty. And I felt guilty a lot during those years. Also, a kind of a big moment in my life during that time was I don't remember the exact year, something like 2010. Do you remember the PBS special that came out? The Bible, for the Bible tells me so.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
featured Eugene Robinson and had interviews. So my oldest were like 10 or 12 years old, and we knew what the series or the documentary was about, and we wanted them to watch this with us, and so they did. And of course, they were convinced to be queer affirming at that time too. But that then kind of, we had to tell them to be careful about this. You had to be quiet about this. And that's one of the big regrets I've had over the years is I'm happy I introduced my girls to these issues early on, but I think in some ways they felt in themselves that they were not quite a part of the community that we were in because the community wasn't affirming. Anyhow, moving forward, um, I ended up losing my job in 2015 as a university professor of theology. Uh, Queer issues weren't at the heart of that. It was more generally having the kinds of theological views that I had, although technically I lost my position because of low enrollment. But the real reason is there were conservative voices pressuring my president and my university. But upon leaving the university, I felt like I could have more freedom um, to be more active in advocating for full queer inclusion in the Church of the Nazarene. And my voice on podcasts like yours and others, Trip, eventually led a group in Indiana that's called the Holiness Partnership, which is a ultra conservative group of Nazarenes. They sent a list of accusations to my district superintendent in the fall of 2021. And five of those accusations were theological in nature, but they were really weak arguments. The people who sent them didn't realize the breadth of theological um, diversity that's allowed under our manual. But one of them was that I can't remember the exact word they used, but something like he affirms homosexuality, the language that you more often hear from the right and the conservatives on this. So my district superintendent, Scott Shaw, brought me in, showed me the charges, and asked me if I would like to give up my credentials or face the next step, which would be an investigative hearing. And I told him that I wanted to face the hearing unless my wife didn't want us to go through another bunch of ordeal, because she and I, oh, we went through so much stress in 2014 and 15, and when I lost my job. So she said, yes, let's do it. So I met then with a group of people from the Idaho area who are ordained elders and laity in February of 2022. And it was a 2-hour meeting. My pastor, Sarah Riley, came as my uh, witness, or witness is not quite the word, but she was my advocate. Um, and the majority of the conversation was around queer matters. And I was very blunt. I said, yes, I'm queer affirming, and the denomination ought to be. That's the way of Jesus. That's the way of love. We're not being true to who we really are if we're not affirming. Um, and I say I was bold in that way because I think it's many people in that position will try to show that the what we call the manual of the Church of the Nazarene can allow for differences of opinion on human sexuality or whatever. And I just went full on, no, the manual's wrong and it needs to change. Surprisingly, that group of people whose job it was to recommend discipline if they thought it was necessary to the district advisory board. Surprisingly, that group heard my arguments and did not recommend discipline. They did not, in part because they didn't think the manual had a place for them to recommend discipline. But I really appreciate those people. That was a real courageous move on their part. The district then took their recommendation and talked amongst themselves on the board. A couple of the people who are on the district advisory board told me about their conversation, as well as the district superintendent. And the district superintendent said, look, there's not two people to sign these charges to make them go forward. So I guess he said they're pending. I sometimes got the impression that they've been dropped, but technically they were still available to sign. And so it would have been more accurate to say they were pending then. However, the district superintendent was really angry with the way I told my supporters about what happened. And in an act of discipline, even though he didn't have the right to do so, he took away my assignment. So in the Church of the Nazarene, you have an assignment every year. And I was assigned as an associate pastor in a church that I'm not getting paid anything, but I was preaching, just to help out, working in the nursery and that sort of thing. He took that assignment away from me, officially at least. But he said I could still preach and help out in that way. But then he took that away from me about 4 months later. So now we're looking at 2022, the fall. And I'm starting to realize that there's not much likelihood that the district superintendent is going to put me back into my position. And it's also the case in our denomination, if you go a certain amount of time without an assignment, then you lose your credentials. And that pissed me off. I was thinking, you're disciplining me without having the grounds to discipline me. And I seriously considered in the fall of 2022 writing a book aimed at the Church of the Nazarene that would be my monograph, like giving all the reasons why Nazarenes should change their view and become fully queer inclusive. But as I was thinking about that, I thought, I'm just one person. And I know quite a few people in the denomination, especially scholars, who are affirming like I am. What if we got a bunch of people together and we put together a collection of essays? So I approached my daughter, Alexa, and she and I, in the fall of 2022, started sending notes to people in the denomination we thought might be affirming. And we ended up publishing a book in spring of 2023 called Why the Church of the Nazarene Should Be Fully LGBTQ Plus Affirming. It's a book of 90 plus essays, some of them written by queer people, some of them written by allies, some of them written by scholars. As that book was coming together, one of the contributors is a guy named D. Kelly, who was a pastor in San Diego. And D wrote an essay for the book and then submitted it to me, but also sent a copy to his district superintendent. And his district superintendent responded immediately by saying, I want your credentials. And that began a trial process for D that took about a year or more after all of his appeals and things, and left him without his credentials and now not pastoring in the Church of the Nazarene. The book comes out, Why the Church of the Nazarene Should Become Fully LGBTQ plus affirming, and I think early April of 2023. And as you can imagine, it made a huge splash. And my daughter and I worked with a guy named Forrest Fisk and some other people to put the essays from the book online and then circulate them through social media. We also started a couple of Facebook groups, one being a private one of people who contributed to the books and friends, current and former Nazarenes. We made it private because we wanted to be very frank, and that group has grown. It's a really big group now. I won't tell you the numbers because I don't want people getting in trouble. um, and in May of 2023, my daughter and I organized a 2-day online conference that featured some of the contributors to the Why the Church of the Nazarene Should Become Fully LGBTQ plus affirming book. And that was a really big success. A lot of people attended. People felt good about it. There was sort of some momentum going. Every 4 or 5 years, our denomination holds what we call a general assembly. And that assembly, we make decisions about rules and etc. I went to that and met with some of the contributors in the book and others. We had a gathering. We wore our little shirts that had our book on the cover. And by the end of that summer, so let's see, it would have been the 1st of August, 2023, I was asked to come in and meet with the district superintendent, and he handed me a new document. This document had 2 charges signed by 2 people who are elders in the denomination on my district. And the charges were that I was teaching doctrines contrary to the Church of the Nazarene and engaging in conduct unbecoming of a minister for my advocating for queer issues and change in the manual. Little side thing, because we got theology nerds here. In the spring of 2023, the general superintendents, like the bishops of our denomination, made a ruling that basically said the entire manual, not just the articles of faith, but also what we call our Christian code of conduct, everything should be considered as equal in doctrine. And so while the statement on human sexuality is not in the Articles of Faith, it's back in the back in another section that talks about various social ethics issues. It was now, thanks to these general superintendents, it was now considered even par as, the doctrine of sanctification in the manual. And so that made it possible for them to make this argument that I was teaching against doctrines. Well, when they gave me that that list of charges in early August, they told me there was going to be a trial immediately, getting ready in the fall. So I quickly took time and started writing a defense to all of the evidence they had and the charges and all the things they were going to throw at me. But that trial never came around. It didn't come in the fall, it didn't come in the winter. Finally, in late spring, I sent a note to our general superintendent. I said, am I to assume that the charges have been dropped because there's no trial? And he said, no, 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 there's something coming. Finally, in late May of this year, of 2024, I got in contact with some folks in Kansas City. That's where our headquarters is. And they started working with me on a trial date. My first move was to ask for a new provision in the manual that had just been decided the previous summer. And that provision allows for anyone to appeal to a a regional theological committee to determine things related to charges. And I thought, well, this is perfect because while not every theologian in the Church of the Nazarene agrees with me on the queer issues, they're going to be a lot more sympathetic to me than just an average person. So I appealed to this new possibility. Well, our headquarters secretary, a guy named Gary Hartke, wouldn't allow it. He said my case didn't apply here. And I thought to myself, if there's ever a case that applies, it's mine. But I have no power. That's one of the bad things about our system. The people accused have relatively no power in this whole process. The person who is chairing the board of discipline to hear my case, a guy named Jim Bond Jr., he sent me some instructions about the trial. He told me that I had the board had voted that everyone had to be silent about what was going to happen and not share any of this stuff with others. I responded to him saying, I'm not going to follow that. I'll make my own decisions on what I share because I had a strategy that I wanted my trial, which I presumed I was going to lose. I wanted my trial to be used as a way to encourage queer people, to encourage allies, and to encourage conversation about this in the Church of the Nazarene. So strategy involved me making a bunch of videos that probably some of the folks who are listening have seen on social media. It involved me publishing my response to all the charges even before I went to the trial and making it available really cheaply on Amazon. It involved a number of different strategies to try to raise awareness of what was going on, to use my trial as a springboard to encourage people and try to, advocate for change. Finally, the trial came on the 25th of July. The Board of Discipline consists of 4 or 5, I think it's 4 clergy, the chair, and 2 laity. And it was in Boise, Idaho. I had 6 witnesses. I actually officially have 8, but 6 could be available for that day, 3 in person and 3 online. Some of those witnesses were queer people, others were theologians, some were both. Um, and they made a case, various cases, some of them making a case that the things I had done don't qualify as conduct unbecoming of a minister, some making the case that doctrine understood rightly allows for my position and that love should be the primary focus by which we think about doctrine. Some of them talking about the harm that the church's stance on queer issues um, creates for queer people and their allies. And also it involved the people prosecuting, sort of the other side of the aisle was the district office, the Intermountain District, a guy named Brent Deacons. He was, I thought he did a pretty good job overall. There were some times I thought he asked inappropriate questions. But the main witness for the other side was the district superintendent, Scott Shaw, since he was the one who was gathering evidence over time. He's the one I had lots of private conversations with. He was their star, and I think only they had one other witness, but the other witness was relying upon the district superintendent for almost everything. So that was kind of the way things played out. Um, for myself personally, I was going through a lot of anxiety in those months leading up to it because, I was getting shortness of breath and going to therapists and working on my breathing exercise and dealing with the stress and the worries and the strategizing um, and my prayer and my goal for me personally at the trial was to do 2 things. I wanted to make it very clear to the board that my primary goal was to live a life of love and that I thought the manual statement on human sexuality did not fit well with love. It had ought to be discarded in the name of love. And secondly, I knew it was going to be an emotional day. And my prayer was that I could conduct myself in a way that I would be proud of, that I would have a loving attitude, not just loving arguments. And for me personally, the biggest success of that day was I felt like I did both of those. I didn't ever lose my cool. I complimented people when they should be complimented, but objected strongly when I thought they were out of place. In fact, several of the people who were on the disciplinary board at breaks came up to me and thanked me for my attitude. That was really important to me because, well, to be frank, the people on the disciplinary board, they know about as much theology. Most of them know very little theology compared to me and my witnesses. They're they don't hold a candle to us when it comes to thinking theologically. Most of them are pastors and the district superintendents, at least by their responses in the trial, made me believe that they are not at all sophisticated theologically. And and so I wanted to make my arguments in a way they could understand it, but also present myself in a loving way. We finished up the closing arguments around 3 or 3:30 on Thursday, the 25th, and we had hoped that they might make a decision that day and tell us. And so my wife and I asked. By the way, my wife was with me at the trial. I'm so glad she was. But according to the Nazarene rules, I can only bring in one person, so I have to choose between a lawyer or my wife. And I really wanted my wife to be there because, she's my partner and we're going to be talking about this for years to come. But also, I didn't want the trial to move into a question about legal or procedural questions, like, is the manual being followed correctly? That's important. And some of my witnesses talked about that, and I talked about it. But for me personally, it was a theological trial, and that's where I wanted to focus. So that's part of the reason why I ask some of the major theological figures that I ask. By the way, let me mention my folks who were at the trial for me. A theologian named Craig Keene, a theologian named Steve McCormick, another theologian named Sam Powell, a theologian named Eric Severson, a theologian librarian named Keegan Osinski, and then Kara Jo Hudson, who's a therapist and queer advocate. So, unfortunately, they told me they would give us the results of the trial, the verdict on Friday. It never occurred. If we finally got it Saturday afternoon, and those who are part of this and haven't seen the full verdict, I've posted that on my website, unedited. It's all there. You can see everybody involved and everything they said. Um, yeah, I guess I'll stop there. You let me ramble for a long time there, Trip.
No, I really appreciate it, and part of the reason I really wanted you to tell the story is, if someone just wanted to hear us talk about theology, I believe we got about 100 hours over the last 16
Probably.
years on the
Yeah.
internet, and there's unless heresy trials involve stakes, I think there'll probably be another 100 more. But one of the things that I mean, I guess I wasn't surprised, but was
Oh, you
nice.
know what? Can I interrupt you just for a
Oh yeah,
second?
yeah.
I realized I said I got the verdict, but I didn't say what it was. I was assuming everybody knew. So let me quickly say that. The verdict was I was found guilty. And not only did they take away my credentials as a minister, they also took away my membership, which is really, I was surprised at that. So you could say I'm now a heretic who is defrocked and excommunicated. So anyway, sorry to interrupt you. I just felt like I forgot to finish that out.
Well, okay, is that a normal thing? Like, I mean, I know about excommunication. It just normally doesn't, uh, you don't normally think of Protestants
Yeah.
doing it that way. Like, even my family, I'll jokingly say we've been excommunicated by Baptist groups, but they'll break fellowship with a congregation. They'll remove you from something. They can't really just be like, you're not Baptist,
Yeah.
because it's a free church tradition. And the Nazarene is pretty similar in, like, in that
Yeah.
there's a lot more autonomy at the congregational level.
Yep.
There's connections between the holiness movement and so, like, is that normal or was it surprising?
It's not normal. It
Okay.
is surprising. I think, and I've asked some people to check on this. I may be the first person who's lost his membership over theological or doctrinal issues. Plenty of people have lost their credentials over moral failures and things like that. But I don't think anyone's ever had a doctrinal trial and been both defrocked and excommunicated.
Would, and I don't know how this works at Nazarenes. Would you be allowed to receive Eucharist at the church you've worshiped at for a long time?
I think so because we've got an open table view, but I won't be allowed to preach, teach, lead worship, be in Sunday school classes. And the way
You
that
can't attend a Sunday school class?
I
Like, they
think,
only let members attend?
yeah. So this is something I've asked for clarification
That's
on, which
really
I
bad
hope
for evangelism, by the way. You should I mean, just, like, you should want them to go, like, new people to go to your Sunday school class, maybe with people
yeah,
they have affinity with, or maybe it's life stage, or kids the same age, or you're both grandparent, like, where
yeah,
they learn quickly someone they're not related to or paid to hug at church. But
yeah, yeah. Well, I think, I mean, this is me reading between the lines, but I think it's appropriate. I think they are so afraid of my influence that they want me to be gone. And whether that means I don't can't attend a Nazarene church, I'm trying to get clarification on that. But they think they took away my membership because they're trying to do everything they can to diminish my influence.
but okay, so I know I'm just if I was trying to make you be quiet, then someone who was like, "No, I wanna talk about this. Actually, I'm gonna go find over 90 people in our denomination that agree with me, from clergy, therapists, our other academics, actual queer people who you've loved and brought into the faith and or have been blessed by you," right? Like, to then create something where just you going to Eucharist or Bible study, is an ordeal just seems like a PR failure. That's just as someone that thinks about this, um,
Yeah, but I
uh,
think that's a really good point because it shows how you and I think about it and how that's so different from the way other people think about it in this case. Because as you saw from the verdict, they think eternity is at stake here. And so they think I'm leading people to hell. So their denial of me, let's say they do just deny that I can't even attend church, that's a small price to pay to keep somebody out of hell. And they think I'm leading, foolish people to hell in a handbasket.
now, does something like this make precedent for, I don't know, the 90 some authors in a book, or the thousands of people in a Facebook group, or the 900 people on this live stream? I mean, obviously, they're gonna be more ecumenical, but there are quite a few Nazarenes. I got emails and messages prior to this from other Nazarenes who, um, like, have wonderful, kind, supportive things to say, and,
Mm,
from, the people saying, "I wish I had the courage or situation or confidence to do this," or, "I wish he had
mm,
been there before I left the Nazarene church."
mhm,
And I've had, queer friends of mine, well, some of them, say, like, "I wish every straight white dude with privilege used it,
mm,
like Tom."
mm,
And all the way down to, like, I'm not just going to tell my own story, but I'm going to go find a whole bunch of other voices in the denomination to put it there.
mhm,
And so the 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 experience that you're having, um, I th I hope you understand how many people within the body of Christ in general and Nazarenes are grieving with you because, um, uh, like, your presence there gave permission to a lot of people
mm.
to have hope for a different future,
Yeah.
right? And then for the kind of tone and response, and you can tell me if I'm reading this poorly, but uh, the way you were treated and the way it was dealt with, um, is treating as ultimate a question around sexuality where just the idea that God might be as nice as Jesus of sorts, like just that might be plausible, is a bigger threat than any of the retention rates going on in the denomination, any other heresy they've ever had. They've never decided another theological heresy meant no longer a member. The thing we invent the no member clause for, and the thing we justify it with eternal conscious torment, isn't the Trinity. It isn't the resurrection.
Yeah. Well,
Or
let
the
me illustrate this by bringing
Does
up
it
another
seem like
doctrine.
odd? Like, as someone that's not in the holiness tradition, I would think the fact that everyone that knows you take seriously that desire to live a life of love, that on
Yeah.
this issue you thought about it, you've always thought with integrity and challenged the denomination when there, but also defended it. You've given the most beautiful articulations of the Wesleyan tradition. Your relational holiness book
Thanks.
is the most beautiful invitation to being Nazarene in an open and
Mhm.
broad way that makes, like, this is a unique gift to the church, what the Nazarene tradition gives. So, like, to me, it's kind of like, people, if you were a punk rocker and then were mad that Green Day was popular, but every other punk band that no one really knew about or listened to finally had people start buy their CDs or see them when they open or whatever, and you're like, I hate Green Day, they're not punk at all. And you're like, okay, yeah, I mean, like, they know how to write songs that lots of people like, they compress their guitars a little bit better, but millions more people like punk music because of it.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not
Great
saying you're
analogy.
Billy Joe Armstrong, or that you
Well,
have
I
a
was
book cover with a turd coming out of an airplane, but
yeah. Well,
I would say that
I want to bring
the
him.
God can't cover is the correlate to Kerplunk.
There you go. um, you know, 10, 12 years ago, I was among many in the denomination who was advocating for real change to what many consider our core doctrine, the doctrine of entire sanctification. And in fact, I directed a conference at my university on sanctification. I got up in front of the entire body of people, which included leaders, theologians, biblical scholars, and I gave them 13 things that needed to change in our statement on sanctification. I didn't get kicked out. Nobody took me to a trial. Like that, just no problem if you're talking about changing our cardinal doctrine. But you start talking about sex and queer people, that's way over the line. Yeah. So what you're pointing to is true, and it's just representative of how this particular issue in our culture is the hot one. I've heard from many young people who are wanting to be ordained elders, that when they go to have their conversation with the team that decides whether or not they're orthodox or not, the only really important question is what they think about queer matters. Everything else is negotiable, but they got to be on the right side on the queer question if they're going to be ordained. And that's just sad, really sad.
And it doesn't work. That's the other side. Is just to clarify, I'm sure you've had this experience. The volume of people, if you have a public platform, who say, I joined the denomination and I believed X, Y, and Z when I did. And then life, friendships, continued study, insert things that humans do as they live happened. And I realized what I used to hold as clear, obvious convictions turned out to be justifications for limiting my vision of God, my love of neighbor, care for enemy,
Yep.
non-human neighbors. Like, we can go through all these things, and as people who are both ordained, both of us. Well, I guess you're not anymore, but as your ordained minister friend, part of being a theologian of the church is both your deep love for the church, the community, and that kind of thing, but also a deep love for
Yeah.
the tradition that's not a part of your particular denomination or congregation, that's alive on the planet and all its diversity and the past, but also we have a responsibility for the tradition we're handing off. Like
Mhm.
anyone in a relay, since it's Olympic time, whether you're in the water or on the land. And one of the things that strikes me about how you've handled this process is with like deep personal integrity that began with how you relate to your partner and your children and how this impacts them. Obviously, they're adults, but they are your kids.
Right.
And then the recognizing that uh, this process is intimately connected to your own congregation, right? Your pastor being there and going through the process and trying to have an integrity, and in the process bringing in people from across the denomination, those that have grown there and couldn't keep their faith by staying in it, right? Like you've done all of this in a kind of way that um uh is challenging but invitational.
Yeah. Yeah.
um and I wonder, for people that have been in similar situations or might be in the future, how you thought about that, those layers of contextualization, from thinking about it with your family and stuff within your own congregation to the denomination to the larger church. Like, what was that process like in negotiating integrity?
Yeah. Um, One of the Church of the Nazarene is a highly pietistic movement, which means that we have tended not to be the kind of folks who say you got to have the right set of beliefs, you got to follow the creeds. We're not like those folks who have a long list of beliefs you have to check off before you enter our congregation. We're more people of the heart. We're more people who want to see a transformation away from a life oriented toward harm and sin and destruction to something that's transformative and positive. And for that reason, a lot of our theology is in our music and our songs and our testimonies. And oftentimes our leaders are chosen because they speak well and they can speak from their heart. Theologically, they might be pretty rudimentary, but they're a good person, and they have a way of expressing themselves. So knowing that, and knowing um, and I had the sense, even early on in my academic career, that if piety mattered most, I could exhibit the kind of piety that I thought Jesus would have me to exhibit, to be a loving person, to be kind and generous, to be listening to others. If I exhibited that kind of piety, I could probably have more leeway when it comes to doctrine. And I think that was mostly true. So many people have come up to me in my life and said, Tom, I disagree with your view on X, Y, and Z, but I sure like you. You're a good guy. And so we get along.
Yeah. And that's something, I think, that runs in the water at Claremont.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I
Yeah.
mean, they're like John Cobb's, like, I think a similar example as of someone whose deep
Yep.
piety and commitment to Jesus personally and exuding even in relationship to people that he has tension with theologically or within the academy or within the life of the church. Um, and I mean, I find that compelling about both of you, right? Like
Oh,
like
thanks.
that. It, it's and Jesus didn't say they'll know we are Christians because we footnoted the shit out of things, right?
Yeah.
They'll know we're a Christian by our love, um, and like it's the abiding in the presence of God that generates love. Now,
Yeah.
for some of us, we have a lot more confidence Christologically when we articulate how we abide in the in the presence of God, expressed in the person of or whatever. But in some sense, I think there is a kind of a falsification of piety by enactment, and
Yeah.
there's something that's getting itself done even in heretics when love's the fruit. And
Right, right. A good example of that. One of my persons at my one of my witnesses at the trial is a good friend of mine named Steve McCormick. He was teaching at our preeminent, our flagship seminary. He's been highly influenced by the Eastern Church. He's a hardcore Trinitarian, and he and I, philosophically, we come from at things from very different directions, but we end up with love, and we oftentimes talk about that. That like, we have different starting points, different assumptions, but we share in common this commitment to love, and that love overcomes a lot. But what I wanted to say on the piety is that one of the things I've realized, Trip, is that this idea that you can get by and people can um, swallow your weird theological ideas like mine if they know you're a good person and loving, that works pretty well when the group is fairly small, when most people know each other or know somebody who knows each other. But the larger the group gets, the less likely people are going to know your character. And in both of the major events in my life, when I got kicked out of NNU in 2015, and now this latest thing where I've lost my credentials and my membership, it was started by people who didn't know me outside of my district on the other side of the country. Um, and then their desire for following the letter of the law motivated people, or actually motivated is not the right word, forced people who were near to me then to start try to make me accountable. So it may be that the strategy to rely upon love and good character is limited by the size of the group you're in. I don't know.
Well, here I want to ask. I'm going to do a few of the questions people have
Okay,
sent in
great.
real quick. Um, one, there's quite a few representatives and leadership from a number of other denominations trying to recruit you.
Well, that's kind. I've
Well, I
not
don't know
made a
how many are.
decision.
Yeah, but uh, but when it goes with dealing with the Nazarenes, there are a couple along these lines. What's next? Can you still fight for your denomination to change from the outside? There are others that were asking, are there ways to continue to support what they were supporting and what you're doing within the Church of the Nazarene? Um, so for those that, when that's a question of what's next for you, but also in all the different voices you've been a part of lifting up and raising to the fore in the denomination, um, do you have advice for allies in that sense?
Yeah. Um, I intend to continue fighting for change in the Church of the Nazarene. I won't be able to do it through official channels, but something that's I've found as a principle in my life, Trip, and it's been true for the last at least 30 years. Every time someone pushes me out, I end up getting more influence on the group that pushed me out. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case here. Even though now I can't even be a member, I'll still have a platform. I'll still be living a life of love and proclaiming that and encouraging those who are inside. So I wouldn't be surprised if, I end up continuing to have influence. I've not made a decision about joining another denomination. I'm definitely not going to do it soon. I may later down the road sometime, but I appreciate those who are offering their denominations. There's a lot of good ones out there, but in the short term, I don't have any plans to change denominations. And if they'll let me to continue attending a local Church of the Nazarene that I go to here in Nampa, Idaho, I plan to go there.
I mean, what how does that even work to just tell people what are they going to do? Like hire security?
Well,
I
yeah,
mean, you
it's a good
literally
question.
been there how long? Like,
Yeah.
and no, I'm just thinking of just like how far does the kind of hubris go when there's somebody whose family's been a part of a congregation a long time, and not the congregation's decision or its leadership has continued to limit the way he can serve the church, not even taking money for it, and then uh, that, like, to treat him this way is one thing, but then to tell him we won't even allow the actual local congregation that's been your family's home. So, like, on your way out, dear heretic, we want you to know, um, you're gonna have to find a completely different place to worship and work out your salvation with fear and trembling, because you are the
Yeah.
first theologian we need to do that to.
Well, I
Right?
don't
Like,
again, I'm still getting clarity on that. The way I read the language, it could be interpreted that I can no longer attend that church, so I need to find out for sure. But I think the answer to, your rhetorical questions, your Trip, is to say that's how much they fear me. I mean, when it comes down to it, they fear that me and so many others, many in fact who are on this conversation, that we are going to continue to grow in size. And if, in fact, they truly believe our views send people to hell, that's the ultimate fear that's motivating them to do these wild things.
yeah. Yeah, that oof. There were other questions about if there are other ways this will impact other parts of your vocation, be it in the academy,
Mm.
different organizations you're a part of, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it doesn't affect my role as a doctoral director at Northwind Theological Seminary. I direct two doctoral programs in open and relational theology there, and they're fully supportive. Doesn't affect my role as the director for the Center for Open and Relational Theology. Um, I can't think of any other sort of things that it directly affects other than the denominational issues or places.
I have a suggestion here from Denise. I think you should go Sunday and drop a check into the church basket and see if it's deposited, because if they decide to take a stink after that, that is in and of itself rather entertaining and
Yeah, well, in
revelatory.
case I didn't make this clear, my local church is very supportive.
No,
The
I thought
church,
you
yeah,
did.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
why like, for if they interpreted the language, which it was
Oh, I see.
ambiguous the way I read it, where
Yeah,
now you're asking your local church who actually loves your whole family, knows all their names. You've preached there, served the communion, like everything ministers do, and you don't work there. You just that's your like place of charge. To then be like, also, y'all can't let Tom in the building anymore.
yeah, yeah.
Like they are not just like as an institution doing this. They're now telling a local church body, y'all got to kick Tom out.
Yeah, this is, what make it even wilder, Trip, is that since the district superintendent has forbid me from preaching, my primary ministry at my church is working in the nursery with the babies and the toddlers.
But do you work with the queer infants?
That's right. So technically, I can no longer even work with the toddlers and babies in my church because that's a class. So it's pretty strange.
Have you ever, honestly though, I mean, I know Tom, but if you open and affirming straight dudes, even though they may have children and grandchildren, don't know how to change diapers. Like, I don't know why, but it's
I've changed
probably,
plenty of them. uh,
oh gosh. Yeah. Um, so what's been the feedback from those who have been a part of your journey up to this, so that this is their church? There were a couple different people that asked it from, in a way about people that were a part of, say, the book project, or
mm,
your the people who you were taking a stand as an ally for and such.
yeah,
What as someone who's both loved and cared for these people and kind of used your role and position within the church to press an issue on other people's behalf, how how are others feeling in this? Like, because I
yeah,
imagine, considering how many times things you said to me on the internet have showed up in your problematic theology file folder. Um,
yeah,
if they're listening to this, I also think it's important to recognize like the consequences, um, that despite trying to isolate something to this one theological idea, and this is just us taking a stand for truth, it communicates a lot to a lot of people.
yeah. Well, let me talk about a variety of people and kind of their positions on things and how I've heard from them. From queer people, the overwhelming response is positive, gratitude, etc. From allies, um, we've been talking about me tonight because I just had a trial, but I'm a part of many other people. Some of them can't be as public as I am, but it's not me alone, that's for sure. There's lots and lots of people. Some have gone through mini trials, not real trials, but sort of meetings with district leaders. Some have voluntarily left. So it's not Tom alone. It's lots of folks who I'm with. And those folks are generally very positive because we're working together on this. We may sometimes have, differences of opinion on strategy or differences of views on theology, but the vast majority of that is very positive. And then, of course, on the other opposite side, I'll call them the strict conservatives. They are, very upset with me, and they send me stuff, and the worst, those that don't have high character, call me bad names and all that sort of stuff. The people that I've been most interested in are the ones who kind of see themselves as centrists. They're the ones who say, we're taking the via media. That's a good Wesleyan way. We're not out there on the left field with Ord and the queer affirming folks, but we're not the meanies who are calling Ord names and talking about hell. They're taking the middle way, they say. And they're usually the folks who say, we're welcoming but not affirming. We love the sinner but hate the sin, that sort of thing. And of course, I disagree with that view because I don't think all same sex behavior is sinful. Um, and there's all kinds of problems I have with that. But what I think some of them are realizing is that as I and others are being pushed out of the church or willingly walking away from the church, they think of as the center is now starting to be viewed more to the left because they're the ones who are going to be left, in the group. And so this decision on their part to try to play the best of both worlds in their view is not going to be a very good strategy in the long run. Now, I also don't think it's a good strategy theologically, but um, uh, in terms of just the kind of political dimensions, those people, some of them are starting to realize that. Some of them are thinking, okay, I didn't really believe what Tom believed, but now that he's gone, maybe I'm next because I'm not hardcore conservative, here. And that's troubling to them.
If you think of the history of the denomination, has the kind of increasing tribalism and intensity around it culturally and identity politics and such, has that played out within the Nazarene church, like in a
Yes.
way that this kind of response you wouldn't have anticipated 10 years ago?
Yes, yes, definitely. I mean, I think it was the last election. I looked, there was a Pew Research did a thing on the percentage of people who voted for Republican candidates, Trump and others. And we were number one amongst all people, more than the Mormons, more than the Southern Baptists. We were the reddest of all denominations. So that element of American culture, at least, plays a big role. Now, the Church of Nazarene is an international church, and the majority of Nazarenes aren't in the US. The majority are in Africa and South America, and they tend to have a more conservative view on queer matters. But if we're just talking about the US, it's definitely the case that the MAGA culture has influenced members in the Church of Nazarene.
Mhm. Yeah, because I think that's one of the things that's kind of wild for a number of my, I would say, more moderate friends that have gotten in trouble in denominations where they all of a sudden became the edge. I mean, even like there are people that were part of the takeover of the Southern Baptist Convention who are now
Now are on
too
the
edgy, so,
left.
um,
Oh,
but I feel like the part of what we're seeing is that kind of energy gets going and then it gets loose. And when part of what it means to be faithful, like when all of a sudden your piety involves drawing lines harder,
yeah,
then who's left is a real important feature for when you get to draw the line because someone has to
yeah,
be on the other side. Um, and I think
yeah,
uh, that is, I think you're like kind of like wisdom for the moderates is think about this Because when you stay silent and when you let that enactment happen, you're increasing the intensity for a constant tightening of boundaries, a
Yes.
tightening of where you're drawing the line. And what's, moderate one day is the extreme the next.
Yep. And
And
there's
that's just,
tons of people in the Church of Nazarene who we'll call moderates, who think that what happened to me was wrong, uh, but they didn't have the ability to stop it because there's enough folks who are more conservative in positions of power. Um, and I think they're the ones who are now starting to say, okay, what strategy do I need to have if I'm not going to get sucked into that ultra right position? And again, sorry to repeat this, but I just think it's so important. We're a denomination that is not emphasized theological doctrines as who we are. We're a denomination who said it's our heart that matters the most. It's our conversion, our sanctification, the transformation, the moving away from sin into a life of love. And
well,
yet,
that's obviously how you go MAGA. Because when I think of peak piety, the road to holiness, like, you don't need just one marriage and one adultery. You need three.
yeah, it is strange, isn't it?
Look at it. Let's see. This is the comments that sometimes get taken out of context. If Tom agrees with everything I'm saying by his inquisitorial committee, Tripp says stuff, and Tom is like, I'm just smiling at him and hoping he changes the subject and doesn't level up.
Well, it's hard to disagree with what you just said. So,
Well, all right. So I have two other questions, Ed, that are
okay.
um in this one I got emailed in advance. And the question was, how has your spiritual practice, prayer life, and such changed through this process? And in what ways, for those who join the lure, would you invite us to pray, connect, send vibes, insert all whatever metaphors people need, because they haven't, fully embraced the process relational view in which God is always already entangled in each moment of becoming. But when it goes to, like, how is your own spiritual life? What's it been like? What have been the struggles and learnings and changes and such? And then for those that keep you in their prayers, what would you ask for?
I had a strange thing happen to me in late May when I got the phone call from Kansas City that the trial was going to begin. I had thought I was prepared psychologically for this because I had like 9, 10 months waiting for this to happen. And yet my emotions ran out of control. I happened to be driving 5 hours from my hometown to where I live, my boyhood home from where I live now, and these emotions were going like crazy in my body. And it was like I imagined myself standing outside of me and looking down and saying, what in the world is going on? I can't control this traumatic emotions hitting me. And throughout the last couple of months, I've been dealing with breathing problems, um, the stuff I'd never had dealt with before. So I've learned a lot about how I only have limited control over my emotions, and that when I'm facing traumatic and dramatic experiences, that I have to do things to try to cope. And probably the thing that helped me the most was actually an exercise I have been doing for many, many years. And that is a breathing exercise in which I uh, symbolically breathe in God. So I take a big breath. And then as soon as my lungs are at their full capacity, I breathe out love. And that exercise and not only helped with the breathing issues, but kind of helped me to keep my focus. So a breathing kind of prayer, um, that's been the number one best thing. I also, as you know, get out in nature. And so I tried to do as much as I could in nature. Although this year with the trial, wasn't able to do as much longer trips as I usually do. But time in nature is a really big thing for me. So like last weekend when I got the before I even got the news, I went up into the mountains and did some hiking and photography, but I ended up cutting that short because I got the trial news and felt like I needed to get back and do correspondence. But those are two spiritual practices that have been big for me. Maybe one other one, and this might, in the Wesleyan tradition, we think um, being together in community is a practice. In fact, John Wesley called it conferencing. And, that can be a conference like talking about ideas, but also can be what probably in the Baptist church you call fellowship. Um, that's a practice. I continue to stay plugged into my local church and corresponded with friends. So that's been helpful to me as well.
Mm-hmm. And when it goes to those who have been trying to support, pray, and care for you in this, are there ways to direct that now?
Well, the notes of encouragement have been really helpful. When people offer their help, my mind first goes to what can we do to show love for queer people and allies? So my mind goes to how do we make a difference to change policies, change statements of faith, change communities to be more loving. And I realize that's a complex question and it's going to vary from person to person. But maybe my response to those who are right now asking how they can help me is to say, what I care about is seeing love blossom wherever it can. And if you can respond by acting to love and wherever you're at, that's a way of helping me.
Yeah, and the last question, when what was it, 4 or 5 years when the first time this kind of started ago?
The first, the accusations that came,
Yeah, it
yeah, that
was.
was no, only 3 years ago. It was 2021.
Did you get in trouble before that? There
Yeah,
was some.
well, at NNU, that was 9 years ago. Yeah,
Okay,
I'm always in trouble, Trip.
well, it's always shocking because I'm just like, they clearly must only listen to episodes with you, or there'd be a lot of other people they could email about.
There you go.
Um,
Oh, believe me, for years and years, people have been hounding me. They listen to every podcast you and I do, and they send things to leaders and said, Tom said this, Tom said that. I've been called in by university professors and superintendents. Yeah, there's people whose life mission is to troll me. That's for sure.
well, um, and here's why I can't remember when this was. There's a lot of podcasts with us together on the internet, so people can
Yeah.
go find it. But you in the middle of it, you'd mentioned a story about someone, you know, getting really aggressive and stuff with you, and I was like, well, what do you do with that? This is a much younger trip before people filled up my inbox with unsolicited life advice and had ran me out of positions and stuff. And you were just like, well, uh, man, I try to pray for them. And I don't. It's not like it's easy.
No.
Um, and I remember when it happened, thinking, well, duh, but also, but really, like you don't just say, you know. And I wonder if this, like, having gone on so long, the kind of aggression towards you, which also led, because of your allyship, hearing more and more stories of people who were harmed way more than you were.
Yeah.
People that you love and care for, and people that were vulnerable enough to share their stories. Um, when you think about those who they're kind of mushy middle cooperation or active resistance to even thinking or considering something different, and you're praying for them, are there like, what do you hope touches their heart, right? Like, in some sense, um like, you're going to be fine. Your family cares for you. Your congregation is probably going to find this a weird thing they need to set out against you. Vocationally, you've reworked things since previous trouble, and such. But when you think of all the stories that don't have a platform, but that you get to hear, and this attempt to kind of continue to pray for those that are harming them, not just you, what would you hope they at least lose a little sleep over or consider longer past their kind of ideological boundaries? Because like you said earlier, like, theology is not the center of the Nazarene tradition. This isn't like there's a set of creeds and doctrines that are like laid out. At the very heart of it is a community of people oriented towards forming their life in the way of holiness embodied in the person of Jesus.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think what was kind of the major turning point for me was all of the relationships I had with queer people and the scientific data that showed that queer relationships can be healthy. Like, I remember having the debates about the biblical passages and how to interpret them. And then the next thing was talking about, queer sex and how that was unnatural and natural law arguments. And then the next one was, well, love is love, which really meant romance is romance. And so if you're attracted to somebody who's not of the same sex, that's just the way you're made. All those standard things we work through, and they're important. But for me, and what I would tell someone who's maybe kind of on the fence, I would say, if you look at the lives of queer people and you look at the literature studying queer people, what you'll find is that nobody's perfect. Not straight people aren't perfect either, but there are genuinely healthy, positive relationships between men and women, and all kinds of um, non-binary folks and bi folks, etc. And if you think that love's aim is to promote well-being, and you realize that queer same-sex behavior can promote well-being, then you ought to be affirming. That's sort of, for me, that's the bottom line. Um, I'm a person who thinks that love should play out in the way it produces flourishing, or what Jesus called abundant life, or what our Jewish friends call shalom. And it seems overwhelming evidence that queer people can be in relationships of shalom, flourishing, well being, abundant life. And that for me is what I would propose to those people who are kind of middle of the road, via media, love the sin, hate the sinner, or sorry, the other way around, love the sinner, hate the sin.
Well, Tom, I really appreciate you taking the time to tell your story and stuff, not just now, but in public and throughout the process. And I know I'm not the only person that's been meaningful for, but just as a person that's got to be your friend for quite a while, um, knowing that you made through the intensity of the trial, um, with your partner and friends there, and um, that you were able to preserve your character despite the attack. I'm really excited that you got to do that,
Yeah.
because one of the things that I love about you, not just because we're friends, but because of how you've lived out your vocation as a public Christian theologian, is that you've continued to serve the church not just with your intellectual gifts, but with the integrity of your character. And
Thank
the
you,
more
Trip.
I've got to know you, and we've spent quite a bit of time together at this point,
Yeah, we have.
and the more I've got to know your family and friends, and people have known you longer than me, uh, that that's my judgment is not abnormal, and so you know, I just I hope as hard as a denomination who introduced you to the love of God revealed in Jesus, all the emotions connected to
Yeah.
that love that was there before there was a Nazarene, well, except for the OG. right?
Yeah.
A love that was there before the Nazarene Church, and will be there long after any of our denominations. Um, that love, you've been faithful to,
Mm,
um,
that's what I've
and
been aiming at from. So that's my goal. I want to thank you again, Trip, for this. This has been a lot of, it's been good for me. It's been fun to see the comments, and I'm going to read more of them as soon as we're done here. But thanks for hosting this. And I've been looking at some of the names who are jumping in on the conversation, and a lot of those people who are a part of this are also kind of nomads. Uh, and one of the big gifts that you have, Trip, is your theology beer camp coming up in October, and that's a, it's a unique kind of community. But I want to plug that for the folks who are here. That's October 17th through 19th in Denver, and with an amazing set of speakers. And actually, I'll even plug the pre-conference on the 17th. There's a whole day of discussion of open and relational theology, and I've got a bunch of people joining me with that. So if you're a part of this thing tonight, and you're missing community because you've either voluntarily left or been kicked out or deconstructed and had to walk away for your own self-care, consider coming to Theology Beer Camp in October, this 17th through 19th.
oh yeah, you should all come. You're all welcome. Theologybeer.camp is a website. And I would say .camp is like in lieu of .com, by the way. I've had people like, what do you mean theologybeer.camp? And they go to theologybeercamp.com, and then it's,
Uh,
or they type the word dot, and I'm like, no, it's theologybeer.camp. But there'll be a host of open relational theologians there.
yes.
Catherine Keller's going to be there. John Tatominal's going to be there. Jorg Rieger, Diana Butler Bass, Brian McLaren. It's going to be a whole bunch of fun. So, yeah, you're all more than welcome to come, and it'll be good for Tom because he'll be a moderate.
That's right. People think I'm far left. Go to Theology Beer Camp.
Yeah,
You'll find some people even further.
that's when you find out Tom. He's
Uh,
nothing. He said, just because the man puts "God can't" on his book doesn't make him that wild.
yeah.
And
Although I got to say this, Trip, when I go to Theology Beer Camp, I often think to myself, on social ethics, I'm not nearly as far left as most people. But when it comes right down to theological stuff, I oftentimes think I'm more left than those people who are left on social ethics issues. So, anyway.
well, all I know is that Tom has now been excommunicated, and he's never drank before. So,
You're gonna try to get me to
oh,
drink a
not
beer.
just
I
the only
get it.
person. Josh Patterson in the chat. Tom's first sip at Theology Beer Camp. Who wants a first sip when you can have your first keg stand and put it on YouTube? Woo!
I love it. Well, can
Yeah.
we leave these comments on so I can kind of cruise through them, because I'm seeing a lot of really nice things, and I want to make sure I
Yeah,
see
and now
everybody's
if
stuff.
they have the red thing next to them, they'll be on the YouTube video,
Oh, okay.
which, the like so there's about half the people are on YouTube, but most of the comments are because there's people on Twitter, and then there's people on Facebook and stuff, and usually the YouTube comments are a lot better. I think YouTube organizes how it does comments way
Mm,
better. So,
yeah.
because you can't really chat with people while you're watching a video live stream on Twitter.
No, but
And
there's
then
some great things here that people have put in here. Thanks so much to everybody who's been a part of this and made all these really very kind comments.
yes. And Tom, they're not lying. They're not lying
They're not. Oh,
when they're
uh,
saying nice stuff about you, or
yeah.
or that if you're ever gonna have a beer, like I'm just saying, you could do it at Theology Beer Camp. Um, and if you are, you should tell me in advance enough that I could brew a specific beer.
I love it.
We could come up with a cool name that somehow includes your name, Heresy, like radically inclusive love, and then make sure it's like so low alcohol that you could finish your glass and never know you drink, Just saying. It's like the opposite of the Jack Caputo beer. All right. Well, thank you all for coming. Yes, a number of you asked like it'll stay up on this YouTube video, and you can come back to it, but I'll put it on the podcast and such. So yeah, and I think we're gonna we'll put it up on the I'll put it up on my Substack with links to a bunch of the stuff, the articles and things that have come out, and with links to the book. So yeah.
Cool. Man, these are really powerful comments. It's another reason I'm thankful to you, Trip, for making this a reality.
Well, I'm going to turn the stream